We spent a lot of time in the first hour talking about the Michigan scandal that's brewing around Jim Harbaugh. And look, I've been leading the charge here. That's the guy for me, the perfect guy at the right time for the Bears until this popped up. And I'm not talking about Pete Carroll paying players when he was at USC, a lot of the stuff that goes on in an unsavory business. If you have the answers to the test and want everyone to think, boy, that guy's really smart. No, I actually had the answers to the test. That crossed a line for me. Do you think, from what you're hearing, that Jim knew about this, orchestrated it, or had no idea?
I mean, I don't know all the details, and obviously, like, it's not my job to cover college football, but I hear stuff. I don't know. I mean, I've got obviously some connections in the Big Ten, and look, like if what's being I don't know one way or the other who is pushing the buttons on all of this, but it just it seems hard to believe. It's like sort of like with the Patriots situation years ago, right? It's sort of hard to believe that, if you had this elaborate operation taking place, and we don't know if what's been alleged is true, if you had this elaborate operation taking place, well then, like, would this like $55,000 a year employee be like going behind his boss's back and doing that? I don't know. I mean, it seems unlikely, right? Like, we've all been in those positions where we're working our way up the ladder. Like, would you do that behind your boss's back?
No,
I wouldn't.
You probably wouldn't, right? It probably wouldn't be worth the risk to do it. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know one way or the other. I do think, whether this stuff is true or not, I mean, it's one of two things, right? Either they caught him red-handed or the NCAA is after him. In either case, doesn't that make it more likely he's going back to the NFL next year?
Well, that's our question to you, because
the other thing, I don't see the Michigan administration running to his defense either.
No, but
that's the other part of it. I mean, you heard all about the contract and everything else, how they're going to do a new contract with him, and now that's all on hold. Well, one thing I do know about Jim is he's very aware of who has his back and who doesn't, and there were some issues with the administration a few years ago, and they made him take a pay cut. And I don't know. I think all of this is going to get really interesting. And I would say this about Jim too. I'm sure this is what might appeal to two guys like you. There's a very identifiable brand of football that he coaches that has shown up everywhere he's gone, and it's sort of like Dan Campbell in Detroit. Like, I think what's so impressive about what Dan Campbell's built in Detroit is he said he was going to build something, and then that's exactly what he did. Like it looks exactly like he said it was going to look like, And Jim's done that at Stanford, at San Francisco, and now at Michigan. So, he can build a program, and he can build something that looks a certain way and has a certain brand. And the one hang up with him going to Chicago is the guy who'd be hiring him there. You guys are aware of that one, right?
You're talking about Kevin Warren.
Right. Yeah, I don't think those two were all warm and cuddly during the COVID thing. So,
correct.
I think that.
But Justin wasn't all warm and cozy either, and they got past that.
Right. So, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because I do think, I would say this, like, I do think, like, for Jim, like, Chicago is one of those organizations that he really identifies with for obvious reasons, and I know he reveres Ditka. And, when he went to Michigan, like, there had been back and forth between him and his alma mater over the years and everything else. But, one thing that got him past it, I think, was, like, the allure of Bo Schembechler, and that the regard he held Bo Schembechler in, and that whole family held Bo Schembechler in, and the idea of sitting in the seat that Bo Schembechler once sat in was incredibly appealing to him, And, I don't want to be the Ohio State guy who's trying to drive him away from Michigan. That's not what's happening here, I promise.
Yes.
But, I do think, like, he sees maybe the Bears the same way, is that's Ditka's old seat. You know what I mean? Like, so, yeah, I think that's something that's certainly a possibility. And look, like, even from the standpoint of Justin Fields, obviously he coached against him, but, remember, like, what he did for Alex Smith, in San Francisco. What people were saying about Alex Smith back in 2010 and what Jim Harbaugh was able to do with him, turned his career around, I think that would appeal to the Bears too, don't you? Like, if you look at it, you see his history, and it's like, okay, like we had this really talented quarterback who went first overall in 2005. It hasn't worked out, but, then Jim Harbaugh gets there and he turns the guy's career around. And for the next decade, we looked at Alex Smith completely differently than we did over the first 6 years of his career. Like, the idea that he could do that for Justin, I would think would appeal to the Bears too.
So, Albert, again, it's a huge if, but if I said to you, he orchestrated this whole thing with Connor Stallions, he acted upon it, he used the answers to the test for everyone to think he's this amazing football coach, which I'm not saying he isn't, but he cheated. He fully cheated. I don't mean bent the rules, took a little air pressure out of a football. I'm talking about the guy across the way, the other coach who's trying hard to beat you on he thinks a level playing field. I knew every play call, so I had the correct defense every time. And all of a sudden now I'm beating Ohio State. Does that make him, in your mind, unhireable by an NFL team? Because for me, I wouldn't hire him then. And I love the dude.
Well, how do you guys feel about, like, trading memorabilia for tattoos? That's what I really want to know.
Exactly. That's like nothing to me. Right. Like what Pete Carroll did. He's got some money for players, whatever.
Let's just say there's a lot of people in ugly colors that were taking moral high ground 10 years ago that can't do it anymore. I personally think an NFL team does not care about what happened in college. And, I think the perfect example of it was Pete Carroll, who I think is a phenomenal football coach.
Yeah.
But you couldn't have been in hotter water than he was. And I think Pete wanted to prove he could win in the NFL, so I don't think it's completely like, I'm just going to abandon the burning building, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
And go across the street to this really nice one. I don't think that's completely what it was, but I certainly looked that way, the way all of that happened and the way he left USC. And I don't think the Seahawks were all that concerned with the fact that Reggie Bush was getting paid to play there, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think the Seahawks cared.
Correct.
This might be a little different, because, like an NFL team, like an NFL team pays its players, so it's not applicable. And something like this would be to some degree applicable to what happens, in the NFL. But I still think there are integrity issues. And, I think if you look at the history of it, the NFL has habitually hired, college coaches who had, dirt in their past. And, it's Pete Carroll, it's Chip Kelly. There was stuff on him at Oregon when he got hired by the Eagles. Jimmy Johnson, has there ever been a program that was seen as more of a, rogue operation than Miami in the 80s? And, Jerry Jones couldn't wait to get him to Dallas, you know? So I think history would tell you that if there was a team that was smitten with Jim Harbaugh and wanted to hire Jim Harbaugh, that, this sort of thing happening at Michigan wouldn't stop them from doing it. I will say that I think like what would be more difficult for Jim is, what people have said about him being difficult to work with, which I don't know. I think that is like sort of a little overblown in that, like, he was hard to work with for some people, and there were other people that loved working for him. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that the whole idea of, the way it ended in San Francisco would probably be a bigger roadblock for him than anything that happened in Michigan, because we've seen, like in the past, the way that the NFL looks at infractions at the college level and whether or not it makes a guy hireable into the NFL.
Okay. Do you think our Bears, are you hearing any whispers, will be active, whether that's Jalen Johnson or Darnell Mooney, who I'm not sure they'll pay a contract to at the level he wants to be paid? Or, oh, my God, could they take calls on Justin Fields?
I don't know about Fields. I think the other two is possible, and I generally the way these things go, guys, like you get to this point in the season with guys who are in contract years, and if extension talks haven't gone anywhere, or if you don't intend to sign a guy, well, then it becomes balancing. All right, so, we're looking at getting 11 more games or 10 more games or 9 more games out of the guy. And then, like, what are we getting in return? So if it's a third or a fourth round pick, that's probably a guy who's going to make your team. And you could get 4 years of a good player to control cost for it. So that's sort of the math that they're doing. And, I think the young guys in the roster who are in contract years who are coming up, they would listen on. Look, like I asked Matt Eberflus, about, an hour or two after the game on Sunday, whether or not Tyson Bagent can win the job here. And, his simple response was Justin's our starter. So I don't think, they would give Justin Fields away to get him off the roster. No.
I'm sure in a dark room someplace, Bill Belichick was watching that Bears film only because it's a Division II quarterback getting a start. That's kind of like his jam, right? Just like the out of reach, out of nowhere type of guy.
Well, we saw it last year with Bailey Zappi, right?
Yes, exactly. I know that he had to be,
the exact same thing.
I know I got Patriots film, but look at this kid. He's got to be. So I want to know what you think, though, Albert, because, again, out of nowhere, this kid is checking it down, 5 and diming it down the field. What do you think of the story of Bagent? And, of course, he's going to get the start against the Chargers, I think, coming up on Sunday as well.
It's a good story, and I think it's a good job of player development by the Bears. Obviously, he had for a guy who went undrafted, had a relatively high profile because of the story with his dad and the arm wrestling, everything leading up to the draft. But I think one thing you can take away from how he's played over the last couple of weeks is that it doesn't seem too big for him, which would be something you'd be looking for a kid coming from Division II. And so. Do I think he's the quarterback of the future? No. But I do think it does give you something to sort of compare Justin against, right? Like where it's, okay, so we're in year 2 of Luke Getsy's offense. Let's see what it does, what we can do with a guy who, where we really have the reins on him, and we're telling him to play a very controlled game, a very, like sort of a paint by numbers game. We're looking at what it looks like with a game manager in there. So I think it sort of gives you, an idea of what it looks like in a more conventional sense, with a more conventional quarterback in there. And, gives you kind of a progress check on where Luke Getsy's offense is in year 2. And, then it also gives you something to compare Justin against and saying, are there some things here that Tyson Bagent's doing that Justin hasn't done? So I think, in 2 different ways, it almost gives you like a control group, to compare what you've had, over the last year and a half against.